there, it's Christy, your friendly online speech-language pathologist and specialist in children's communication and behavior development. Because behavior is a type of communication, indeed the very first developing type of communication. Today we are doing another video in our pyramid model series, and we are still on the bottom tier of this pyramid. I'll show you the pyramid again right here, and we are in the teal tier of this pyramid. We are talking about supportive environments, and this is helpful not only for our kids who have different developmental needs, but it's also helpful for our typical kids. What happens is that if we have a chaotic and non-supportive environment, everybody has more trouble managing themselves. We all get a little bit chaotic if our environment is chaotic. Not only does a supportive environment help our non-typical developers, but it also helps our typical developers. We all need stability in our environments and in our lives in general as much as possible in order to develop to our fullest potential. In this video, we're going to be talking about developmental appropriateness. I'm dealing with this in my own personal life at this time. One of my volunteer opportunities that I do each week is I work at my church in the children's programming to provide support to some of the kids who need a little bit more adult input to manage themselves well. And one of the things that consistently frustrates me is when curricula or programs in general are not developmentally appropriate. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a preschool classroom and the art project was having kids cut things with scissors. 2-year-olds. That's not developmentally appropriate. It's also not developmentally appropriate to have a lesson that's 20 minutes long if there are kindergarteners in the room. Attention spans are limited. We cannot expect things of a kindergartner that we can expect of a 15-year-old. This is the nature of development, and we need to keep our awareness up of these different needs that different kids have and the different appropriateness levels of things that we might want to teach or present. I'm going to talk about a few different areas where we need to make sure that we are developmentally appropriate in our programming or in our home, in our expectations, in our responses. And then I'm going to give you some resources so that you can research developmental levels and trajectories outside of this video where we are spending time together. The first thing I want to say is probably the easiest, and that is accessibility. We can't welcome a child in a wheelchair into our program if we don't have a ramp. That seems pretty easy. We need to keep in mind that some children will have visual impairments. Some children will have motor impairments of various kinds. There's a child I work with right now who has cerebral palsy, and one side of his body is less mobile than the other side. And there are some hand motions that we do in our music and movement time that really frustrate him because we're supposed to do a little heart, or we're supposed to do, hug ourselves, and he is not capable of that because his one arm doesn't work the same way as everyone else's. And so it's not bad to have these motions, and he's working towards them. I mean, it's a kind of physical therapy to watch and attempt to imitate, and I suspect he will get better at these motions over time. But we had to explain to him, it's okay if you don't do this heart. You don't have to do this heart. You can do this, or you can just do an I love you with your hand. That works better. So we need to be aware of this because kids can get dysregulated if they can't do what everyone else is doing. So have options. If we have a child who can't hear appropriately, seat that child towards the front of the class. Make sure that things are in writing if that child is a reader. So far, some kids also don't read. And this is another thing that greatly frustrates me. A lot of curricula have things that are written, things that kids have to read or respond to. There's a video on the screen and there are two big words and the kids have to pick one or the other one. Guess what? Kids in kindergarten, kids in first grade, they're probably not very successful readers yet, especially after COVID happened and kids got out of the routine of school and learning. So learning in the traditional way, I guess. Kids are a little more delayed now in most circumstances than they were before COVID. So we need to continually be aware of what we're presenting children and the fact that they might not be able to participate because we've made the bar too high. That makes me sad. So let's not do it. Okay, that was number 1, accessibility. Number 2 is attention span. For every year of life, assume approximately 1 minute of attention span. That means a 5-year-old has 5 minutes of attention span. Once we get to the age of kindergarten age, it's about 10 minutes and then plus grade levels. Of course, this depends on the child, but this is a reasonable expectation to have. Once again, if you have a 20-minute lesson and you've got kindergarteners, first graders, second graders, they're not going to be able to pay attention for 20 minutes to a lesson that is not fully engaging. Yes, a child might be able to participate in Legos for 20 minutes or a video game for 20 minutes, but not in something that's taxing or that isn't naturally interesting to that child. Please keep this in mind because it makes me feel like my head is going to explode. We expect too much of these kids and then we shame them for not being able to sit still and listen. That's not okay. That is on the adult. That's not on the kids. The next developmental appropriateness thing we need to consider is sensory opportunities. We have a lot of kids who have various sensory needs, and this is another area where traditional teachers often get upset if their kids can't function. But what they're not looking at is that that child has a different sensory system and needs different inputs in order to manage herself. We cannot not provide something the kid needs and then be angry at them when they can't succeed. Please watch this series up here where I talk all about the 9 sensory modalities and why it's so important to pay attention to those things. Our kids can't function if their needs aren't being met. We want to pay attention to curriculum. There are a lot of bad curricula out there. I'm talking about churches, I'm talking about schools, although less so. Sometimes curriculum writers do not understand kids. And they don't understand what kids' capabilities are. They don't understand different developmental tracks that kids might be on. They don't pay attention to what a child should be able to or is likely to be able to do at a certain age level or developmental level. And it just makes it very frustrating for everyone, especially for the child. So pay attention to the curriculum that you choose. A good curriculum should be age appropriate, should have lots of opportunities for kids who learn in different ways. There should be a lot of visuals. There should be sensory experiences that are involved. There should be interpersonal interactions. It should not all just be displayed on a screen. Kids need to have social interactions with people and emotional connections to the people they're learning from, because that makes them more interested in learning and more interested in whatever it is that they're learning about. Of course, if you're in a school district, you probably don't get to choose which curriculum you're going to use for any particular subject, but do your best to add in those pieces that your individual students need, because it might be different for student A than for student B. We can add in more visuals. We can add in more auditory learning. We can add in pictures instead of some of the directions in the curriculum. You know, a picture sort of first this, then this, then this. We can adapt these curricula to make them more appropriate for our students. And we should be doing that because we want our kids to be able to learn in a way that's appropriate to them. We also want to think about language level. This is one that's very important to me as I'm a speech language pathologist and I'm really focused on communication because that's my thing, communication in all ways that it might occur. One problem that we as adults often run into is that we produce too much language. We put too much talking out there, especially for our kids whose communication skills are still on the developing side. If a child is not using any verbal language yet, the number of words that I should use when communicating with that child is 1 to 2 words, a 1 to 2 word phrase. If my child is saying nothing and I want to model how to request something, I might hold up the juice and say, "Juice, please," and then wait. Maybe my child will say something, maybe not. Either way, I have modeled, "Juice, please." If I do this 100 times, my child is likely to be able to repeat, "Juice, please." If I say, "Mama, I want some juice, please. Thank you," and my child is supposed to go from 0 words to 10 words in one jump, that's not going to happen. The reason is because of something we call the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD if you want to be fancy, which sounds like some sort of military installation. What this is the idea that we can make progress, but the progress that we make is in a particular zone where it's not too easy for us, but it's also not too difficult for us. We give up if it's too hard, and we don't bother making any growth if it's too easy. We need to be in this particular zone of challenge. So this is what we need to provide for our students as well. Especially in this case, I'm talking about communication development. I have lots and lots of videos about communication development, and I recommend that you watch them. I'll put a little link up there to the playlist about communication development. And keep watching. I suggest that you subscribe. Maybe give me a thumbs up if you like this video, because if you subscribe, you will be made aware of all of the videos that are upcoming, and all of them will have to do with communication in some way. Now that we've talked about some areas where we need to pay attention to developmental appropriateness, I'm going to give you some resources. I have a lot of books, and I have gone through my professional library and I have picked out the books that I think are the best for figuring out different levels of development. I've also put some traditional child development charts, links to them down below. I don't find those quite as helpful because some of our kids don't develop in that traditional trajectory, and we need other ways to define what is appropriate at any time. So I have picked out some alternative resources. The first one is the Hanen program, Hanen. I don't know, oh, here it is. The Hanen program. And I like this book more than words. It is really super fat, but that's because it has lots of big writing and pictures. So don't be scared. This program at this age is focused on younger children, and this program focuses on the different stages of communication partner, which I love. This is perfect because all communication is between more than one person. You don't really communicate with yourself. You communicate with another person or creature. This book does a really cool thing by breaking down different types of interaction. This game is called Up and Down. You lift a kid up, you put the kid down, but in a playful way, and how you can make that a therapeutic activity at each of the different 4 stages. There's horsey ride, there's chase, up and down, swinging at all these different levels. It's really great. This is a great example of how to adapt your play and your communication style to the developmental level of whatever child you're working with. So this is a great resource. The next resource I have is called Floor Time Strategies. This is from a program called the DIR Floor Time model, and I love this model. Sometimes it can be a little tricky for families to figure out how to use, but it's very well defined and it's brilliant, super brilliant, because it's very relationship based. So this one has children split into pre-verbal, non-verbal, and verbal. And it has different activities split into those 3 levels. That's a great way to define what's going on with kids. They also have this nice chart, also a pyramid, believe it or not related to the pyramid model, where they talk about the different levels of interactive or relational development. And you can learn from this book and from other books by similar authors how to work with kids at each level. One of those books is called The Child with Special Needs. That's a really great one, and I recommend it. Another recommendation that relates to the DIR model is the affect-based language curriculum. This is officially not a curriculum where you would necessarily teach something out of it. It's more of a structure for working on specific skills. So as you can see, this is the checklist for expressive language. And if a child is typically developing, these skills would take place 16 to 24 months into life. And it starts out with spontaneous production of words. This is not the first level. The first level is way, way back at birth. The first level is engagement or co-regulated reciprocal interaction, birth to 9 months. So it has a little checklist, and you write down if the skill has, it's heavy, if the skill has been observed, if it's been observed not very many times, and more details about that particular skill. The idea of this is that we're not working on a skill 23 pages further in the book if the child still hasn't mastered any of these skills, because all skills are the foundation for the next skill, and we need to master the early ones before we can master the later ones. It kind of makes sense that you would need to know how to walk before you can run. And that is the idea of all of these different frameworks that I'm showing you. Children need to learn the basics before they can learn the more advanced skills. So these checklists are the reason why I bought this book. Not because I'm using a particular curriculum, but because I like how they laid out these checklists. And I think it would be helpful to families as well as to other professionals out there who are wondering about how to measure some of those more difficult to measure skills. Some of our standardized tests don't actually measure back and forth interactions very well. Some of them don't measure looking with intent or reaching with intent or directive pointing with intent very well. Whereas this isn't standardized because it's a checklist, but it can help us organize our brains and our treatment to better specify where the student currently is and what the next step is. We always need to be able to identify where the student currently is before we can work on whatever the next skill in line is. So we have to know where the stage the child is in now, and the next stage that we want to work on. So it's kind of a complex thing. We're doing something very difficult here and very beneficial. The next resource and the last resource that I'm going to recommend to you today is called Do, Watch, Listen, Say. I have an older version of this book that I kind of like more. I think it's organized a little better, but maybe I'm just not used to this one yet. The basic idea is that it organizes play, social interactions, communication, and some other things into a developmental checklist. And for each item in the checklist, for example, this is basic communication skills, makes requests. So basic communication skills has a whole list of things that develop in a particular order. And we are now on makes requests. And so it has a whole section on just making requests on how we work on that skill with the particular child. This is helpful because if you don't happen to have a good therapist that you're working with your child, a speech language pathologist, then this is a book where you could pick it up and you could page through and say, my child is currently not successfully making requests. How can I work on that? And then you can work this to death. And when your child is successfully making requests, you turn the page and you say, okay, the next skill we're going to work on is basic responses. And how do we do that? Here's how we do that. Now, of course, this is not standing in for a professional in your life who has a lot of experience, even though this was written by professionals with a lot of experience. Please get your speech language pathologist involved. And at the same time, sometimes there's a delay in getting services. Sometimes there are no services available in your area. So keep coming back here, subscribe, and get these resources because you will be better able to help your child if you educate yourself, if you continue to learn the skills that you need to identify where your child is currently functioning and then figure out what the next step is and how you can work on that next skill. I hope this video gave you a whole lot to think about. It is challenging to figure out where kids are, and one of the challenges is that it doesn't always correspond to their age because some kids are delayed, some kids have a splinter skill. This is one of the reasons it's really great to have a professional involved, if at all possible. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. You can leave them in the box down below if you would like. You can also email me if you can. You can find my email address on my website. And I think that's all I have to say today. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!